Does the Bible say we have to be circumcised? Does the Bible say we have to be circumcised? The Bible does not explicitly state that Christian believers must be circumcised. According to the New Testament, circumcision is not a requirement for Christians. Instead, believers are encouraged to be circumcised of the heart, trusting in Jesus and his death on the cross for salvation. Jesus himself was a Jew and was circumcised, but he did not lay down circumcision as a requirement for faith. Rather, he taught believers to put their faith in him and his sacrifice for their sins. Here are some bullet points explaining the biblical perspective on circumcision. Old Testament requirement. Circumcision was a significant religious practice in the Old Testament, primarily among the Hebrew people. It was a physical sign of the covenant between God and Abraham, as described in Genesis 17:10-14. Under this covenant, all Hebrew males were to be circumcised on the 8th day after birth as an outward sign of their faith and commitment to God. Mosaic Law. Circumcision was also mandated as part of the Mosaic Law, which included a variety of religious and moral regulations for the Israelites. This practice continued as a religious rite among the Jewish people throughout their history. New Testament perspective. In the New Testament, the significance of physical circumcision is re-evaluated. The Apostle Paul, in particular, addresses this issue in several letters. He emphasizes that circumcision of the flesh is no longer the central requirement for salvation or righteousness before God. Circumcision of the heart. Paul teaches that true circumcision is a matter of the heart, symbolizing spiritual transformation and faith in Christ. The focus shifts to faith in Jesus Christ as the means of justification and righteousness. Galatians 5:6. In Galatians 5:6, Paul sums up the New Testament perspective on circumcision. For in Jesus Christ neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but faith which worketh by love. This underscores that faith, not a physical ritual, is the key to salvation and Christian life. In summary, while circumcision was an important religious practice in the Old Testament, the New Testament teaches that physical circumcision is no longer a central requirement for salvation. Instead, it emphasizes faith in Christ and a circumcision of the heart as the true sign of being in a right relationship with God. Does the Bible say we have to be circumcised? Circumcision has been practiced for centuries and is an important part of many religious faiths. It is a procedure that has both physical and spiritual implications, and its place in modern society has been the subject of much debate. In this blog, we will explore the biblical teachings on circumcision, the spiritual implications of circumcision, and the physical benefits of circumcision. We will also look at the law of circumcision in the Torah, the practice of circumcision in ancient times, and the controversies surrounding circumcision today. Finally, we will examine whether people should be circumcised today. What does the Bible say about circumcision? The Bible has much to say about circumcision. Genesis 17:10-14 says, "This is my covenant, which you shall keep, between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you." This passage shows that circumcision is a sign of the covenant between God and his people. Etymology of the biblical word circumcision. Unraveling its origin. The word circumcision has been a source of conflict and debate for centuries, and its origin is a highly contested topic. Its etymology can be traced back to three ancient languages: Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. In this blog, we'll explore the origin of the word circumcision and the sources of conflict surrounding it. Origin in its broadest sense. The word circumcision refers to the surgical removal of the male foreskin. This practice is believed to have originated in Egypt, more than 4,000 years ago, and is mentioned several times in the Bible. Hebrew. The Hebrew word for circumcision is mulah. It comes from the root mala, which means to cut. This is where the English word circumcision is derived from. The practice of circumcision is closely tied to Judaism, and it is believed that Abraham was the first to practice it, as was commanded by God. Greek. In Greek, circumcision is called peritomy. It is derived from the Greek word peritemno, which means to cut around. The term was used to refer to the surgical removal of the foreskin in ancient Greek. Aramaic. The Aramaic word for circumcision is halada. It is derived from the root halat, which means to cut off. In Aramaic, the word halada is used to refer to the surgical removal of the foreskin. Sources of conflict. Circumcision has been a source of conflict and debate for centuries. It is seen as a religious and cultural practice by some, while others view it as a violation of human rights. Additionally, the practice of circumcision can be seen as a form of gender discrimination against men, as it is a practice that is only performed on male infants. There is also debate surrounding the medical benefits of circumcision, with some arguing that it has no health benefits, while others point to studies that suggest it can reduce the risk of some diseases and infections. The word circumcision has a long and convoluted history, and its origin can be traced back to three ancient languages: Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. Its practice has been a source of conflict for centuries, as it is seen as a religious and cultural practice by some, and as a violation of human rights by others. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to circumcise a child is a highly personal one, and should be made with careful consideration. The significance of circumcision in the Hebrew covenant. The circumcision of newborns is a powerful symbol of the covenant between God and His people. The covenant is a promise to obey God's commandments. Circumcision is also a sign of dedication and faithfulness to God. It is a reminder of the commitment to live a life of righteousness and obedience to God's laws. In the Old Testament, the sign of Abraham was to be circumcised. This was a sign of the covenant between God and Abraham that sealed their agreement. It was also a sign of Abraham's faithfulness to God and his dedication to the values of the Jewish religion. The tradition of circumcision was passed down to the Jews and was seen as an act of faith. It was a sign that the Jewish people were dedicated to God and willing to abide by His laws and commandments. In the Old Testament, it was seen as a sign of commitment to God and the Jewish faith. The importance of foreskins in the Old Testament was also seen in battle. When an enemy was defeated, the victors would take the foreskins of their slain enemies as a sign of victory. This served as a reminder of the strength of their faith and the power of their God. It was also a way of demonstrating the superiority of their faith to those who opposed them. The importance of foreskins in the Old Testament was also seen in the concept of infidel. An infidel was someone who did not believe in the Jewish faith and was not circumcised. Those who were found to be infidels were considered to be outsiders and were not allowed to join the Jewish community. The importance of foreskins in the Old Testament was also seen in the concept of proselytes. These were non-Jews who wished to convert to the Jewish faith. If they wished to join the community, they were required to be circumcised as a sign of their commitment to the faith. Finally, the importance of foreskins in the Old Testament was also seen in the Christian faith. It was seen as a sign of the covenant between God and Abraham and was seen as a sign of faithfulness to the Christian religion. The importance of foreskins in the Old Testament is clear. It was a sign of faithfulness to God and was a reminder of the strength of the Jewish faith. It was also seen as a sign of victory and was a way of demonstrating superiority over those who opposed them. For these reasons, it is easy to see why it was so important in the Old Testament. The law of circumcision in the Torah. The Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, contains the law of circumcision. This law mandates that male infants be circumcised on the 8th day of life. The Torah also states that any male who is not circumcised is excluded from the covenant and cannot participate in the Passover feast. Genesis 17:10-14. God commands Abraham to circumcise himself and all the male members of his household as a sign of his covenant with Abraham. Leviticus 12:3. God instructs Moses to circumcise all the male children of Israel on the 8th day of their lives. Deuteronomy 10:16. The Lord commands the Israelites to circumcise their hearts, as well as their flesh, so as to love Him with all their heart and soul. Exodus 4:24-26. God instructs Moses to circumcise his son on the way to Egypt, when he was 8 days old. Joshua 5:2-9. God commands Joshua to circumcise all the male children of Israel before they enter the Promised Land. 1 Samuel 18:25-27. Saul commands David to be circumcised as a sign of his loyalty to the king. Jeremiah 4:4. God commands the people of Judah to circumcise their hearts, so that they may no longer be stiff-necked and rebellious. Ezekiel 44:9. God commands the priests of Israel to circumcise all male children at the age of 8 days and to perform the ritual for all newly born males. Acts 7:8. Stephen recounts the story of Abraham's circumcision and mentions that it was a sign of the covenant between God and Abraham. Romans 4:11. Paul mentions that Abraham was circumcised as a sign of the righteousness that he had by faith. The New Testament and circumcision. The New Testament speaks of circumcision in several passages. In Romans 2:25-29, Paul states that circumcision is not necessary for salvation. He states that it is the faith of the believers that matters, and not their physical state. In Colossians 2:11-13, Paul states that circumcision is not necessary, and that God's grace is sufficient for salvation. Acts 15:1-2. This passage deals with the issue of circumcision, as some of the believers insisted that Gentile Christians needed to be circumcised. Father, grandfather, minister, missionary, deacon, elder, author, welcome to our family. View all posts.